And now, a Native Podcast with Matt and Zach.
And welcome back to another Native Podcast. I am one of the co-hosts, Zach, and with me, as always, is Matt. And I always got to start it off this way, buddy. Matt, buddy, how is it going today?
Doing pretty good, my man. Just winter's setting in, and it hit with a big punch in the face this year.
Oh, I know it's -4 right now on Wolf Point. High of 0, low of -9. So it's a cold one. And I think that low is coming. I think it's only going to get colder as the next few days go on. So we're inside. We're nice and warm. We're here in the new studio. If you haven't noticed, we got the new background. We're up in Wolf Point recording now. We were full time in the house here. So definitely back. Glad to be back and doing these things in the 2024 new year, talking with Matt. This is kind of our first conversation. And if you haven't read the term, it's about hunting and fishing rights. So we're really excited to talk about that today. I'm excited to talk about it. Matt, is there anything before we get going? Sometimes you have stuff. You got anything for us today?
Yeah. Well, today I'm just excited to talk about this because you and I have our personal conversations all the time.
Right.
For the listeners, Zach and I both hunt. We fish. We get out there. You do it out there in Montana. I do it in Oregon, which is a completely different ball game.
Oh,
and
100%.
yeah, we have experience, and it's dear to our hearts, this topic. So
Well, and exactly that, because it's not all what it's made out to be. I think there's a lot to it. People don't quite understand. So this is kind of why we do these podcasts, right? Is kind of these 101 episodes of like, here's some examples, here's some stories, here's some things that we found doing our initial research, and kind of from our understandings of these topics already to share with you guys to say, hey, let's point you in the right direction to learn more, because this is going to be one of those topics that it's going to vary very uniquely down to the like tribe, the state, the county, the whatever federal lands are involved. There's so many different factors. And that's why later today I'm going to give out some resources. There's a lot of like the University of Montana, University of New Mexico. They got some good stuff out there. And we're talking hundreds of pages of documents, because it is documenting this stuff, because it goes back to the beginning of time. And I'm going to open up the episode with this story. I found it because I'm working with Mark on the national park stuff on the Wandering Ways podcast. I'm like, I come across this stuff and I was like, this is going to be a good story. So I'm going to share that here in a little bit. But we have a good episode. I'm excited for it. I'm excited to be doing this in the 2024 new year. Hope you guys are too. Glad to have you. We really, if you could also just take the time right now while I'm talking, give us 5 stars, like us on YouTube, subscribe, all that fun stuff. It helps us out. If you could share it with your grandma, share it with your friends. It really just helps. And just give us the 5 stars when you can. It helps us, and we want to grow this thing. We want to get better funding, better producers, all that over time. Me and Matt, we're doing this just ourselves. I'm in Wolf Point in my bedroom, basically. Well, I'm in my office. You're up in, in your house there in Woodburn.
Kaiser,
Right.
in my apartment, and yeah, so it's good to be here. Just a quick question here for you, Zach. Were you successful in hunting this year?
I was actually. I have right here. Not even staged. This is just because it's in my office, because I'm redoing the garage, and that's where he's allowed to go. So that's actually the one I got this year. Nice little 3x3 horn, and that was on private land, with some checkerboarded state land. He was actually on state land, but to get to it, we had to go through private land. And I had to use a Montana hunting license as a Montana resident, as a tribal resident. I use my tribal ID whenever, because I like to access that right too when we go to fishing game, because it's showing like, hey, no, like you got to accept this ID. This is a federal form. This is my hunting. Like I hunt with this ID. This is what we do. And And I got
Well,
that. I got a nice 3x3. You've eaten some of the jerky.
oh,
Yeah.
amazing. No, I didn't have as much luck. I struck out this year. I went for deer and elk, but that's how it goes. That's how it goes
Well,
from where you're at too.
but exactly as we talk about those hunting and these stories, yes, like these are some of the conversations we have because there are people think, oh, natives can go hunting, or what we can and can't do is often, not the right answer. There's general ideas that people have, and sometimes, yeah, you might be kind of right, but not really. It's really you got to dive down. You got to look because different tribes even have different like hunting rules or what can happen on their tribal lands. Alaska, you have the subsistence living, so definitely some good things to come, and we're going to talk about all that today. And I'm excited to talk about it. Anything else?
No, I think we're ready to rock and roll, man. You got some stuff to lead us off with, so we can get right into it.
All right. So first is a story, and it comes from Fort Raleigh National Historical Site, North Carolina, right? And the reason that I thought this was very specific is because right here, fishing and hunting were very important activities for the Native Americans found living here by Sir Walter Raleigh's explorers and colonists in the 1580s. For Indians relied heavily on the meat of wild animals and fowl and fish for their food. And that was no different when you really look at the Europeans at that time, right? So the 1580s, and that's kind of why I selected this story to tell us, because if this is back, this is documented long time ago. We were civilized societies. Hunting and fishing was our way of rights. We're not necessarily farming. We didn't domesticate the animals. There was no need for that. They were plentiful, and they were in this harmony with us. So that's my interpretation of like when you think about this, right? When you think about that, like in the 18 or in the 1580s, what's going on with acknowledging the natives hunting and fishing, right? Lacking conventional tools or metal, they used materials available to them and employed a high degree of ingenuity in devising methods for catching and killing fishing game. The Europeans were impressed, especially with their fishing techniques, which proved much more effective in the shallow sounds surrounding Roanoke Island and those employed by Raleigh's colonists. For the most part, the Indians caught their fish in net-like obstructions called weirs. They are placed across streams or channels in the much same way as modern pound netters catch the seasonal runs of striped bass or shad. The weirs were made of reeds, woven or tied together, and anchored by the bottom of poles stuck into the sand. With the tops extending above the surface and waters, their weirs looked very much like fences and were arranged in varied pattern designs to catch the fish and impound them. One of the colonists, Thomas Harriot, described the Indians' weir fishing technique, setting op reeds or twigs in each water, which they so plant one with another, that they grow still narrower and narrower, thus preventing fish, once imprisoned, from swimming out again. Harriet added that yet another fishing technique, which is much more strange, with poles made sharp at one end by shooting them into the fish after the manner as Irishmen cast darts, either as they are rowing in their boats or else they are wading in the shallows for the purpose. Sometimes the spears or harpoons were fitted with sharp points made from the hollow's tail and certain fish like sea crab, wherewith by night or day they strick fishes and take them up into their boats. The Englishmen reported that Indians caught a wide variety of fish, including trout, porpoise, rays, old wives, probably menhaden, mullets, plays, they think that was flounder, and very many other sorts of excellent good fish, in which we have taken and eaten, whose names I know not, but in the country language, they also said that for 4 months of the year, February, March, April, and May, there are plenty of sturgeons, and also in the same months of herring, some of the ordinary biganies of art is in England. But for the most part, the fat greater of 18-20 inches and some up to 2 feet in length. So definitely talking about like the different runs and stuff. So acknowledging the seasons, acknowledging the fact that, we have these sophisticated net techniques and tools, right? 1580s acknowledged. Englishmen acknowledging that, you know, it's that history that, when you see this, like we have been acknowledged as nations, but even in that definition by the National Park Service, we're still referred to as Indians, and we're still referred to almost as this lesser civilization, even though in reality,
But
during that history,
it
we
sound-
should have been equals.
right, and it sounded like the colonists almost incorporated some of their methods because they worked.
We're still using that fishing method today, that fish net
Yeah,
today. It's based off of the reeds, and it just the way nature works with one another. When you look at a lot of the things natives did, it's working in harmony with the nature, working with the tools you've got, like the bison and hunting the bison and what that provided out on the plains. Like I joke it was the Walmart of the plains, but you got your house, you got your tools, you got your food, you got your clothes, you got, what else? Like you're getting everything from the bison, your ceremonial stuff, your gift cards. No, I'm just kidding. What else do you get at the store? But no, you know what I mean though?
yeah,
Like, we were civilized. We're not farming a cow. And at the same time too, when you look at histories, you look at we as Native Americans, as sovereign nations, went through things like the Industrial Revolution with America, but it's not taught that. It was such a different, this manifest destiny bullshit that happened, did happen. And it sucks to acknowledge that. It's like, but at least we're still fighting it. It hasn't overcome completely. And we are pushing forward. We're celebrating that culture and things like getting these hunting and fishing rights that we're talking about today. In
right.
my opinion,
That goes back to the trees. I mean,
all the way back.
all of it goes all the way back. So
And you can read or not read, listen to our episode on treaties to learn a little bit more, if you have questions of what treaties are.
Did you know there's a new native apparel company?
no, I did not.
It's called Shop LS 574, named after the 574 federal tribes and the Little Shell descendancy of its founders.
Wow, that's really cool, man.
It is. It is becoming a spot to order native apparel by and for natives, working with native designers and teams to help best represent Indian country.
That's awesome, dude.
For sure. Now make sure to go pick up some Native podcast swag as well as other native gear while shopping at shopls574.com.
Oh, yeah. And do not forget to use code ANP10 to save on your next order.
That's ANP10. Hey Matt, did you know there's a tribally owned net company?
No, I did not.
Not only are they tribally owned, but Blue Ribbon Nets also creates totally sustainable products. With Blue Ribbon Nets, not only are you getting quality nets, but even eco-friendly ones as well.
That's awesome, dude.
It sure is indeed. Make sure to use code RUGAROO10 on your next Blue Ribbon Net order to save. Again, the code is RUGAROO10, RUGARU10.
I am definitely getting a Blue Ribbon Net now.
Tune in every Tuesday to hear your favorite native podcast.
That's right. A Native Podcast has new episodes every week, ranging from boarding schools to Indian child welfare.
Not only that, but we have Indian country covered from Maine to California and Florida to Alaska, Hopi to Blackfeet and Choctaw to Tlingit, and all those Crees in between.
And all you other natives and non-natives out there, we want to remind you to tune in this Tuesday to A Native Podcast.
Is your res runner in need of new lights? Well, look no further than our friends at Oxteo, an industry leader in LED lights. Make sure to use code RUGAROO on your next set of lights. That's RUGARU.
NARF has a really good definition. And if you're not familiar with NARF is the Native American Rights Funds. And they have a hunting and fishing, and then in parentheses, treaty rights and subsistence category. Hunting and fishing remain vital to many tribes. Based in tribal sovereignty, governmental agreements, and also affirm tribal hunting and fishing rights. Today, demand for animals and fish often exceeds supply, putting tribal rights at risk. Frequently, That scarcity stems from ill-advised U.S. policies. So, besides legal aid, we provide technical assistance and negotiate intergovernmental agreements to restore and maintain habitats. So they help with a lot of that. They have some related cases. They have the Enbridge Line 5 pipeline at Bay Mills Indian Community, the Klamath Tribe's water rights, the Village of Cake hunting rights. It's an Alaska v. Federal Subsistence Board, the Bristol Bay Protections Pebble Mine, which is the Bristol Bay Economic Development Corp versus Haldick, Bering Sea Elders Group, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, native of the Village Venti tribal government versus Bernhardt, the Crow Tribe off-reservation hunting rights, Herrera v. Wyoming, the Klamath water rights, Bailey v. United States, hunting and fishing rights, organized village of Saxamon IRA v. Torak, hunting and fishing rights, Katie John v. Norton. And that's some of the bigger examples when you look at those cases that have happened. And there's some really good ones. The hunting and fishing rights, Katie John v. Norton. That's the 20-year legal battle over Alaska subsistence hunting and fishing rights. I'll give you the background of it. Katie John is a Athabascan Indian and the daughter of the last chief of Batsulnitas. She was born in 1915 near the present-day community of Slana and lived with her family in the native village of Batzulnetas, Batzulnetas. From the time of her birth until 1937, Batzulnetas, which means roasted salmon place. I'll just call it roasted salmon place every time I see it. Is a historic upper Atna village and fish camp and is located at the confluence of the Tanada Creek and Copper River within what is now Wrangell St. Elias National Park. Roasted Salmon Place is a revered spot among Upper Athna who have fiercely defend this site for generations. Oral history and early written accounts tell of a massacre of Russians by the Upper Athna at Roasted Salmon Place around 1794, provoked by the abduction of women and the Russians driving out the men in the winter without adequate clothing. In 1885, nearly 100 years later, Lieutenant Henry T. Allen arrived in Batsulnetas with Athna's help. He became the first non-native explorer to cross the pass from the Copper River to the Tana River in Alaska's interior. Roasted Salmon Place was occupied by the Upper Athna on a year-round basis until the mid-1940s, when the villages were relocated to Mentasata so that the children could attend schools. The residents of Mentasta are nearly all from or have their roots in Batzulnetas. A few of the Batsulnetas, God, I feel so bad that I'm butchering this name, people moved to Dot Lake, Northway, and other communities in the late 1930s or 40s, but continued to participate in the salmon fishery, though family, friends, or personally returning there to fish. Katie's father was Sanford Charlie, and her mother was named Sarah. The family moved, and other village members relied on the salmon. The family and other village members relied on the salmon much for their food. Salmon was dried, boiled, fried, and sometimes roasted. It provided sustenance throughout the year. Alaska became a state in 1959 and assumed management of fish and game in 1960. In 1964, the state closed down the subsistence fishery and nearly all other traditional fishing spots in the upper Copper River and its tributaries. Under the guise of conservation, although there was no documentation of any need to do so, closure to the subsistence fishing ended its regular use as a fish camp. Nevertheless, Katie John and other residents of the village and former residents returned regularly to visit grave sites and experience the spiritual, cultural satisfaction derived from being present where they grew up, where their ancestors made their home. Traditional fishing continued on a sporadic basis, albeit subject to harassment by state officials. Aboriginal fishing practices were protected under the federal law of Aboriginal title. Although those protections were ignored by the state, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971 ended any theoretical or formal protection of Aboriginal substance users. But in the 1980 subsistence title of the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act was passed. That federal law was intended to protect customary subsistence uses by the Alaska Natives and other rural residents. So it really helped set forth, like accessing their tribal lands and their tribal rights to the fishing. I've heard stories of people in Alaska having issues with fishing.
Right. Well, and then the salmon runs recently have not, they said, haven't been what they used to be. And
Right.
so there's that struggle too if you're dependent on them for a significant amount of your food, you know.
Well,
Um,
and it's do we need fish food in the Midwest in the US? You know what I mean? Is that like, do we need salmon, or really should we save that for the Northwest where that's is where it's from? You know what I mean? Like, let the fisheries be those numbers, let them be what they were. It's not intended to be mass produced.
and in their area is really the Sacramento Delta north to Alaska is the salmon like
Yeah,
area of the northwest coast and up there, British Columbia as well,
it's
But
not the same.
yeah,
And
no,
they have low numbers, and like there'll be years where they say, oh, it was a great year, we had a lot, there was so much. It's like, yeah, but it's nowhere near those historical numbers. And we need to like think about that when it comes to these. And it's like, it
well,
sucks too, because there are people who are like, well, I like fish, I like eating fish, I don't eat anything else. And I it's a weird world we live in. It
it's
really
like,
is.
but about like, does the five-star restaurant in Chicago need to serve salmon? You know what I
Right.
mean? Or somewhere like that, like,
I mean, anywhere though, but like you're not wrong, because like it's like, think of all the sushi restaurants between there, Chicago and Billings. You know what I mean? That's your mid a part of the Midwest right there. And I just think like we don't need that. And that's that commercial side driving it. So then you hear the tribal side where they cut off use to the tribal residents and say, no, you can't do this. And even some tribes have taken it upon themselves to say, you know what, we're not going to fish it as hard
yeah,
this year because we want the number to come back better next year, because you need so many to go upriver, you know,
yeah.
and you're not having that. And there's really good documentaries on Patagonia about fishing and subsistence. Like, you just Google Patagonia, they kind of have like free
Oh,
movies
that's
on.
an amazing movie. That's a
Yeah,
real well done. Yeah.
it's called Artificial, and
Mhm.
it's about like salmon like farms. Like, it's the DNA is ruined essentially by having these hatcheries.
Right.
So you're not getting that same wild salmon, and wild salmon, you can taste the difference. Like that, there's a huge thing. And there's something more to those journeys when you talk about like the great journeys. You see the caribou, or you see like the wildebeest in Africa. You think about the salmon and their journey and what they do and how they go into the rivers, out to the ocean, all that.
Right. No, I think that's great. And since we're on salmon, I think you were going to talk about a significant salmon rights figure if we're ready to transition there.
Yeah, I can. I was also going to just bring up some other cases first,
Oh, go ahead.
but we
Yeah.
can bring him up. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
I will jump into Billy Frank and the fish wars, and this was actually an article published November 3rd, 2022 by Jennifer Davis, and I thought this was really good. On a dark night in 1945, 14-year-old Billy Frank Jr., a citizen of the Nisqually tribe, walked down the water's edge on his family's property, Frank's Landing on the Nisqually River, to fish for salmon. He cast his net that night, and the following morning came down to pull the catch and butcher the fish, and game wardens arrested him. In recounting the story, Frank said he told them, "Leave me alone. I fish here. I live here." As a Nisqually citizen, Frank was entitled by the Medicine Creek Treaty also known as the treaty between the United States of America and the Nisqually and other bands of Indian, to fish on these lands. Frank said that he was exercising his traditional rights. His arrest started a lifetime of activism. The 1854 Medicine Creek Treaty, made between the Nisqually and 8 other tribes and the United States, took away some of the Nisqually's traditional lands. However, the Nisqually, Puyallup, Stellacome, Squasquin, Sahamish, Stechas, Tepixen, Squiattle, and the Sahewamish tribes and various bands of Indians insisted on retaining fishing, hunting, gathering, pasturing rights in the area. Billy Frank was well aware of the treaty rights. His father, Willie Frank, was born only 25 years after the treaty was signed and kept and relayed oral history to Billy about their traditions, the treaty, and the land throughout his life. Willie Frank Sr. frequently said, "When the tide is high, the table is set," and the right to fish was critical to the survival of the Nisqually, Puyallup, and other local tribes represented in the treaty. The salmon, fish, and shellfish that they fished and harvested both fed them and sustained their cultural practices and health. However, in the 20th century, the state of Washington was passing laws which affected the abilities and rights of indigenous people to fish. During the late 1940s and 1950s, the state grew the non-Indian salmon take, providing the annual commercial licenses for $15 with no daily limit on catch. The change led to a 7-time increasing the number to commercial fishermen. Hydroelectric projects on the upper Nisqually were built by the city of Tacoma and Centralia. The timber industry, the housing boom, and the use of pesticides in the growing agricultural industry all contributed to the decrease in the number of healthy fish. The 1960s, the non-Indian commercial Chinook salmon harvest decreased over by 50% compared to the 1940s fishing harvest. Meanwhile, local law enforcement beat, arrested, and fined Frank and other Nisqually and members of local tribes on multiple occasions for fishing on their treaty lands. Willie Frank Sr. went to court for fishing rights in the 1930s and successfully won an injunction from the state to keep the state from harassing indigenous fishers. The injunction lasted from 1937 to 1944, but ended a year before Billy Frank's first arrest as a 14-year-old. The number of arrests and associated violence, as well as injunctions filed by the state against Nisqually, Puyallup, Muckleshoot, and Quileute, and others, increased greatly in the 1960s and 70s. Game wardens and law enforcement would take the nets of the indigenous fishers and take the fish they caught in their nets as well. The state claimed these enforcements were for conservation, but Billy Frank and other indigenous fishers argued that they were taking less than 5% of the catch, a figure later confirmed by estimates, compared to catch taken by sport and commercial fishermen in the 1960s. Hank Adam, a citizen of the Fort Peck, Assiniboine, and Sioux tribes, and resident of Frank's Landing, worked with Billy Frank and his sister Maisel Bridges on the protests that Adams organized, including the demonstration of 2,000 protesters in Olympia. In 1964, Adams also arranged for Marlon Brando to protest in a fishing boat at Frank's Landing, and for Charles Curial to come out to Frank's Landing and cover the fishing and treaty rights protest for Curalt's CBS show. In October 1965, local indigenous peoples held a fish-in at Frank's Landing that lasted for 6 weeks. On September 9, 1970, police attacked a fishing camp on the Puyallup River and arrested 55 adults and 5 children using tear gas and clubs to break up the fishing camp. Ultimately, the fish wars led to legal action. In 1970, the United States filed United States v. Washington 384 F.312 on behalf of the Hoh, Macaw, Muckleshoot, Nisqually, Puyallup, Quileute, Skokomish, Lummi, Quinault, Sauk Sayudal, Saxquin Island, Still-Squamish, Upper Skagit, and Yakima nations. The judge, George Hugo Bolt, had considerable experience, but not with Indian law. Billy Frank and some of his co-protesters and several elders testified, including Billy's dad, a 95-year-old Willie Frank Sr., On February 12th, 1974, Judge Bolt found that the indigenous fishers were entitled to 50% of the harvestable catch, with 50% for non-native fishers, and that indigenous people could fish at their usual and accustomed places. However, the Bolt decision was difficult to enforce. Slade Gorton, Washington State Attorney General, advised the public that they did not follow the ruling because the state would get it overturned. The case continued to be challenged in court. Of Judge Bolt's decision, Billy Frank said, "The judge listened to all of us. He let us tell our stories right there in that federal court. He made a decision, interpreted the treaty, and gave us a tool to help save the salmon." Frank's actions saved the salmon too. He was arrested more than 50 times in the course of his activism. He said, "We're going to survive. We're going to be healthy." And his willingness to put himself on the line to protest and continue to argue on behalf of the treaty rights and the salmon was a work of his lifetime. In 2015, the Nisqually Wildlife Refuge was renamed the Billy Frank Jr. Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge in honor of his services and activism.
I didn't realize he was arrested 50 times.
That's wild, huh?
And another little tidbit here I found is also in 2015, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. And it's wild.
Did what like we need like that we need the state of Washington to step up
Right.
and honor those rights a little bit better. You know what I mean? Like they need to be better.
Yep. And they and their activism during that time, it really was it set it up for the Puget Sound tribes, the Columbia Upper Columbia River tribes, even crossing over in the Great Lakes area with anywhere where native people fish. It
No,
like,
exactly.
you know,
It's huge. I mean, it's good, and you need that. And it's just, but it's like there should also be that common sense to it too. That's like, oh well, like it's weird that it's like you have the like stereotype that like you get the like, oh, you're native, like you get to go to school for free, and it's like, nah, that's not how it works.
not how it works.
Like stuff like that where it's like it should be that simple where it's like, oh, you're native, you can fish and hunt wherever. Like
Right.
it should be the law. Like, you know what I mean? Like those are those treaties, those are those things.
Yeah.
But we still have these hoops that we jump through. There's a lot of that. And I found the justice.gov, the Department of Justice has some good resources too. The United States Constitutional Treaty Clause authorizes the president to make treaties with the concurrence of 2/3 of the Senate in total. The United States has ratified approximately 374 treaties with native nations. Through these treaties, Indian tribes ceded land and natural resources to the United States while retaining all rights not expressed granted. The United States Supreme Court has affirmed this principle of reserved rights, explaining that treaties were not a grant of rights to the Indians, but a grant of rights from them, a reservation of those not granted. United States v. YNS 198 US 371381 1905. These rights often include the right to hunt, fish, gather plants both on and off reservation. The Indian Resources section brings affirmative litigation and participates in negotiations to protect the treaty grant guaranteed rights and resources associated with tribal lands, including tribal treaty hunting rights, fishing, and gathering rights. So that's definitely something like right there, like these rights are given to us through treaties.
Right.
There's certain things, about being indigenous and being native in the US. And this is I think one of those things, especially when you say the US, because even you have the Canadian tribes, the Mexican indigenous folks, this is one thing that kind of separates us apart right here is the fact that we have these treaties with the US government, which enable these rights. So we're going to fight, and that's where again I hear Reno saying it. The warriors are in the courtrooms. You know what I mean? And they're fighting those battles.
Yeah, and this makes me think of, anytime a tribe gets more rights back, essentially, like or hunting, like there's always these people that like complain about that too, where it's like Warm Springs got land back in the Ochoco Mountains, which is like east of Prineville, Oregon, and all the like hoorah hick guys were like, oh, they don't have to pay for anything. I have to pay for stuff. It limits access to us. And it's like, dude, you have the whole state to hunt in.
Right.
Like,
You want your one little area, but not only that, but it's like it wasn't yours to begin with.
right.
So you should be grateful that you had it
You have
when
that.
you had it.
Yeah.
And maybe we work on building those trusts, right? Because like I'm sure tribes would love to enter into agreements with the state and say, you could hunt our certain tribal lands, you know, as Montana, like say Montana, right? Say take the
Yeah.
reservation, let's say the Crow Reservation.
Mhm.
And there's people on the Crow Reservation, there's tribal land that's just land, because there's places where natives have said, no, we're just going to leave that be. And say, no, we'll open that up to native or to non-native hunters if they are a resident of the state
Mhm.
that we're in, and if the tribe may be getting some kickback, you know, from the state, some funds, you know, like there's programs like that that could be enabled,
Oh,
that
exactly.
you know that those hunters could, you know, could work for with tribes to figure out. But we don't want to work together. That's the other thing, that like people, it's like, fuck, we have so much more in common when you sit down and talk with people, that it's like, let's just have the conversation and come to a compromise. Because like whatever happened to coming to a compromise, it's become I'm right, you're wrong, I'm gonna blow up on you, I'm, you know, all that, right? And it's like, dude, let's just meet in the fucking middle. You know.
And some tribes do offer permits to hunt or fish their land if you're non-native. You just have to go to them and buy it, you know,
And now we would like to take you to our segment, Music on a Native Podcast. This week, Yahe Tahaya, featuring Harmony Grace by Sten Jody.
We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
Songmakers, what they call me. Songmakers, what they call me. I'm a songmaker, storyteller, dream catcher like an eagle feather. Got strong medicine, big blessings, had hard struggles and the big lessons. Everybody doing what they can to survive. Don't be hating on the motherfuckers 9 to 5. You gotta pay your bills, put gas in the ride. Keep it realer than real and just look in the eyes. You might go ahead and call it corny or lame. Nobody needs to want your little fame. Not everybody thinks it's cool to flex bank. Keep your asses cool and grow your little brain. Or maybe study law and make a little change. Or maybe do nothing and just keep it the same. Cause everybody got their own choices, and everybody got their own voices. I ain't out here trying to preach. Why these suckers ass bitches try to leech? Yeah, sanitize these fuckers with the bleach. Lyrics on the beat, flame in the heat. Yeah, like an Indian burn when my music hit the streets. Eating buffalo and salmon, no time for the beef. But I got all the smoke, roll and choke. Dipping on these motherfuckers, all the choke. I see auto cheese, boy, I ain't broke. But that don't really mean I gotta boast about it. And I got a few times that I lost hope, but that don't really mean I gotta post about it. And I'm just trying to build my life. Fuck all you hoes, I got a wife. I'm just trying to shine real bright. Fuck all that cloud and that mainstream hype while I sing. Songmakers, what they call me. Songmakers, what they call me. I've seen things, been through some shit. My brain cells been way too lit. My past catching up with me way too quick. And my waist being heavy, yeah, plus 2 clips. I'm just trying to walk my journey, not be judged by all of these battles. All of my regrets and all of my troubles, all of my stress and all of my problems. Yeah, I'm just trying to live a better life than the old me. Used to be a youngster, now I'm an OG. Reaching for the top, but the top is kinda lonely. Success is a blessing, but the blessing's not a trophy. Social media got y'all trippy, giving up your soul for some fucking attention, hoping for replies, DMs, and the mentions. And I'm just trying to ride out, keeping my distance, holding it together. I'm just keeping it low key. Without my ancestors, there would be no me. Madoma funga, Madoma funga. Shit out here a little different. How these wolves out here live vicious. Motherfuckers out here try to catch a slipping. Cause anybody out here can get it. So don't fuck around and find out. When them don't give a fuck boys slide out. Like who really there when you're down and out? Like who really cares when you're not around? Said locked up or boxed up, that's prison time, or dead gone. That's cellmates or dirt hugs. That's hard life in these sad songs singing. Songmakers, what they call me. Songmakers, what they call me.
And that was Yahe Tahaya featuring Harmony Grace by Sten Jody on A Native Podcast.
What you're saying, agreements with the state, is a good segue to a little thing they did in Oregon here recently. So I'll just read it really quick.
Yeah.
So just recently, there are a few tribes within the state of Oregon who signed historic agreements for hunting and fishing rights within the state. As of now, 4 tribes now operate under such agreements: the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, the Confederated Tribes of Coos or Umpqua Sayusaw Indians, the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Indians, and the Coquille Indian tribe. Grand Ronde was also on this, but they received objections from Umatilla and Warm Springs, and that's a bit of an intertribal beef going on there. So Grand Ronde wasn't able to enter the agreement because other tribes prevented it, which is another, we're not going to get into that right now. But yeah,
that's another level of complexities because each tribe is a sovereign nation in that sense, right? So they are acting with their own tribal sovereignties and saying, no, we're going to exclude you for this reason. You know, it's interesting because in the same way, you take like Rocky Mountain tribal leaders in Billings there, that they gather all the tribes they ever represent for all the tribes of Montana, but they include Wyoming because Wyoming only has one reservation, so they include Wind River. And that's kind of that same thought of you're using that tribal sovereignty of saying, hey, we're not going to let state lines define this region. We're not going to let states, which are not necessarily sovereign nations, that's the, when you really, it's crazy when you look at like the United States, each state really is set up like a country like Europe in that way, right? But we decided to say, no, we're going to be more of a federal, larger government that is one. So yes, you have state laws, but that's where these tribes go above that because they have that sovereignness, which is more that federalness.
Yeah.
So they can act in these ways, that, and people don't get that.
Exactly.
They just they think, they just don't think wrong. What? Go ahead.
I think this Oregon agreement I thought was a good model with the 4 that they made the agreement with, because it's telling them the tribes are now responsible. Like tribal members can go through their own tribe to get their hunting, fishing licenses. And they can hunt public lands within their treaty, like forest land or non-private land within their treaty lands, you know?
Well, and depending on your tribe, depending on your state and how that works, I am sure as hell as a Montana, because we have two cards again. We have our tribal ID card, we have our state ID or our federal ID card, you know. So I'm sure as hell people double dip. I don't know the legality of it, but
Right.
where you could hunt on your tribal land and fill a tribal tag, but
Uh,
also I can go hunt like and hunt my like a Montana tag on in Montana. You know what I mean? Like there are people do it, and that's part of where that subsistence living
mhm.
comes into play. Is we have people who've done this. They know how to live and keep their family fed off 7 deer and an elk or whatever that may be, you know, like, and it's in Montana, it's in Wyoming, it's in South Dakota, North Dakota, it's in the Great Lakes, it's in Oregon, it's in, you know, Washington, it's in Alaska, it's in New York, it's in Maine, you know, these places, even in some of the like I would argue even Florida and stuff, you got people hunting different
You just
animals.
need ideas for double dipping there, Zach. I've never thought about it in that way. And it's like, we were just out in South Dakota for work, and I'm like, man, I could do that out there.
Yeah, you can hunt on your tribal land. And
And then within the state somewhere too. So
well, I keep telling you to come over here.
I know.
Be real easy.
Well, it's like not if you're not gonna see animals, but which one do you want?
I know, like that was this guy this year hunting. Just not to get too far off topic, but it was just like he was right there, right at the right opportunity. The jerky, you had some of it. A test is some great jerky. It's great jerky.
That was a Fort Peck reservation made right there.
Exactly, right there. The deer are true and true. But I wanted to share with our friends up in the Great Lakes another big victory was the U.S. versus Michigan. The United States filed a lawsuit in 1973 on behalf of the Bay Mills Indian community to obtain a determination that a 1836 treaty reserved the community's right to fish in areas of Lake Michigan, Huron, and Superior. Several other tribes intervened, and the treaty right was initially confirmed in a 1979 decision. After that ruling, the parties entered into a consent decree in 1985, in which Great Lakes fishery was allocated among the parties by lake zones, species, and catch limits. After that decree expired in 2000, the parties negotiated a new agreement. In 1979, the 5 treaty tribes in the United States v. Michigan amended their complaint to assert tribal hunting, fishing, and gathering rights on land ceded to the United States under the 1836 treaty. In 2004, the Indian Resources section filed a supplemental complaint alleging that the treaty continued to reserve a right to hunt and fish on inland lands and waters within the ceded area that were not required for settlement with the meaning of the treaty. This phase of litigation was resolved by a settlement agreed entered into in 2007. So they settled.
Yeah. So and they're still pushing pipelines up in that same area to this day, you know.
No, and here's another one too, kind of in the same area. That was big. It was Minnesota v. the Mille Lacs Band.
Oh,
The Indian Resource section frequently involved in litigation protecting tribal off-reservation treaty rights to hunt, fish, and gather. In Minnesota v. Mille Lacs Band of Chippewa Indians, for example, the Supreme Court that held the Mille Lacs Band of Chippewa retained treaty rights on land ceded to the United States in 1837 under the authority of the Treaty of St. Peter's in 1837. The Chippewa ceded a vast tract of land stretching from what is now north central Wisconsin to east central Minnesota. Article 5 of the treaty stated that the privilege of hunting, fishing, gathering the wild rice upon the lands and rivers and lakes included the territory ceded is guaranteed to the Indians during the pleasure of the President of the United States. In 1990, the Mille Lacs Band of Chippewa filed a suit seeking a declaratory judgment that they retained the infrastructure rights under the 1837 treaty and an injunction against the state of Minnesota to prevent it from interfering with those rights. The United States intervened as a plaintiff in the suit. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the tribe, and the court disposed of the government's argument that an 1850 executive order, which contained a removal order, terminated the usufructuary rights under the 1837 treaty because the parties pointed to no source of the authority for the president's order, and the president's power, if any, to issue the order must stem from an act of Congress or from the Constitution itself. The court next addressed whether a subsequent treaty in 1855 abrogated the infrastructury rights. It noted in the entire 1855 treaty is devoid of any language expressing, mentioning, much less abrogating the infrastructury rights, despite the fact that similar treaties negotiated with other tribes during the same period expressly revoked usufructuary rights reserved in earlier treaties. The court also stressed that the 1854 treaty, to which the Mille Lacs Bands was not a signatory, secured new infrastructury rights to the signatory. Bans on the newly ceded treaty, the court concluded that the 1855 treaty did not abrogate the infrastructury rights granted under the 1837 treaty. Finally, the court rejected the state's argument that the Chippewas' infrastructury rights under the 1837 treaty were extinguished when Minnesota was admitted to the Union in 1858. The court's affirmation of the Chippewas' treaty rights was an important decision not just for the Chippewa, but for all tribes asserting their infrastructury treaty rights. The decision affirmed that such treaty rights are retained unless a treaty or statute or executive order clearly expresses an intent to abrogate those rights. Some big words in there.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
I mean, that's what they say, those law degrees, man. Those you gotta know, like that's where it's at, because these Indian law, you're dealing right there. We're dealing with Wisconsin, Minnesota, the federal government, the treaty, and they're dealing with multiple treaties in that case because they're trying to figure out what are these rights.
Right, multiple treaties, multiple states that in a tribal. It's like I can get messy real quick.
Real quick.
Real quick.
And really what it comes out where really a lot of the issues come down to is hunting off a reservation. Because the reservations have their own rights too, like here I'll pull up, for example, the Fort Peck tribes, right? So they literally have 8 rules. General rules of hunting regulations. All non-Fort Peck tribal members hunting within the boundaries of the reservation must possess a valid conservation license and appropriate stamp. No person shall pursue, shoot, kill, or take to attempt any wildlife between 1.5 hours after sunset on one day and 1.5 hours before sunrise of the next. Trespass, you may not hunt or fish on private, fee deeded or allotted land within the boundaries of the reservation without permission from the landowner. No shooting within 500 yards of any occupied building without the consent of the person occupying such building. Leave gates closed for livestock purposes. Littering, pack in, pack out. Do not litter the area you're hunting or fishing. Every person while hunting or accompanying someone hunting shall wear an outer garment that contains wear an outer garment containing a quantity of daylight fluorescent orange sufficient to be easily detectable by other hunters. So that's not even like regulated. No hunting of varmints or fur-bearing animals. All sportsmen are required to stop, directed by the tribal conservation officer of the Fort Peck tribes on their way back from hunting areas, even if they possess no birds when checked. Sounds like bird hunting is pretty big up here too.
Right.
So people want to come hunt the birds. No shooting of hawks, eagles, or owls, though. You're not required to purchase a Montana license in order to hunt the Fort Peck reservation. So if you wanted to come hunt birds up here, road hunting is prohibited. So they have certain rules, but
Interesting.
yeah, and then they have, so that's just kind of the generic rules and whatnot, but they have special hunts. You know, you could come like antelope. There's some that are like they have 25 antelope permits starting at $500 each.
Mhm.
Buffalo, they have a ranch, so you can come shoot a buffalo for like $5,000. It looks like.
Oh, wow.
They say trophy bulls for mounting, good for burger and mounting. $5,000 minimum price available through online auction. So there's the online auction.
That's cool.
Enrolled members have a hunt as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's these lotteries that you can do. So they offer stuff in that sense.
Yeah, I think for my tribe, it's like $500 for a small, like young bison bull, and it's like 1,000 for a trophy bull.
I'll go halvesies with you. You want to go shoot one?
One of these days, man, that's the plan.
And
So
well, like halvesies on the meat because you also got to pay to butcher them. See, that's the thing people don't get. That's just the tag.
well, the cost is actually hiring a tribal guide with our tribe. So that's all you pay. It's the 500 or 1,000 depending on which one you want.
No, that's really good. No, and that's one way of bringing the bison back. Tribes have done, and I
Yeah.
know you harp on Gerald and Little Shell and say, "Hey, get that bison ranch going." I know you like to mention that.
I every time I see him, I'm just gonna put it in his ear, man. I'm
Kind
a,
of go ahead.
did you want me to bring up the crow case?
Here in a little bit, I was just right before that. I just wanted to give some references
Go ahead.
to some things for people. I kind of some really good examples. The New Mexico Law Review, the University of New Mexico has a really good 100 or 48-page document on the Native Americans' right to hunt and fish, an overview of the Aboriginal spiritual and mystical belief system, the effect of European contact, and the continuing fight to observe a way of life. It's a really good document. University of Idaho has Indian hunting, fishing, and trapping rights, the record of controversy by Donald L. Burnett Jr. That's a 28-page document that's really good. University of Washington has a good document about the Billy Franks protests. It's a really long one as well, if you want to read. The Montana law books has, the Indian Treaty of 1855 is a really big treaty in Montana, whereas by the Treaty of 1855 between the United States of America and the Confederate tribes of the Flathead, Kootenai, and Upper Pend Oreille tribes have a certain right to fish and hunt, whereas it appears to the common advantage of the state and Indian tribes to cooperate in manners involving hunting and fishing. Therefore, the department may negotiate and conclude an agreement with the councils of Confederate Salish, and Kootenai tribes of the Flathead Indian Reservation for the purpose of, and it gives those purposes. So there's different rules like that. The University of Montana has a good 141-page document of the history of Indian and hunting fishing rights as they pertain to the Confederate Salish Kootenai tribes, the right to traditional life and the struggle for native hunting and fishing rights. Caleb Pennington from West Virginia has a good abstract, good kind of 15-page paper on that. And the School of Law, Case Western Reserve University, Canada, United States Law Journal, January 2014. The law of Native American hunting, fishing, gathering outside of reservation boundaries in the United States and Canada. It's another 103-page document that really gets into it. So if you want to dive in, those are some good resources. But another really good case that Matt, I'll let you go ahead and talk, is about the Crow Tribe off-reservation hunting rights, aka the Herrera v. Wyoming case, which the Crow Tribe secured recognition of its hunting territory and hunting rights in the mid-1800s, but Wyoming refused to recognize them. The U.S. Supreme Court affirmed the tribe's rights in 2019. The fight continues. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I think basically with this case, this was a really big one years back. So in 2014, Croesus and Clavin Herrera and other tribal members went hunting on the Crow Reservation. They followed a herd of elk from the reservation into the Bighorn National Forest, where they shot and killed 3 elk, then took the meat back home to help provide food for the winter. Subsequently, the state of Wyoming cited Herrera for illegally taking an elk in the Bighorn National Forest in Wyoming. And so basically at first he was found guilty by the state court in Wyoming, and then this case dragged on for several years till 2019 when that was overturned and the tribe won the case in 2019. And that was a huge win for, treaty rights, hunting, off reservation treaty rights, essentially for hunting. Set a big precedent for other tribes, other treaty territory. So it was a really important win for Indian country.
No, it was. And kind of given some more background, there is the Crow tribe signed in May of 1868 the second treaty of Fort Laramie. In the
Mhm.
treaty, the tribe ceded a large piece of its reservation lands to the United States. However, tribal leaders reserved the right to hunt on those lands, even though they are no longer part of the reservation. The treaty clearly states that the tribe could continue to hunt on ceded lands as they always had done, so as long as the lands remained unoccupied by settlement and the tribe maintained peace with the United States. For the tribe and its citizen, this stipulation was essential because for many Crow people, hunting was and still is today not only a way of life, but an essential means of survival. The conditions of the treaty are still in force today. Today, more than 9,000 of the Crows tribe's 14,000 enrolled citizens live on the reservation. Hunting for food and survival is still a vital and necessary part of the cultured way of life. And just like you're saying, the Bighorn Mountains, not only that, the Crow tribe is based in Montana, but the Bighorn Mountains are both in Montana and Wyoming. So they were kind of hunting the line. I think I'm not 100% sure if they were purposely knowing that like Wyoming was going to cite them, or how it all came to be and why. Or if they were stalking this herd and it took them into Wyoming. I forget exactly what
Yeah,
it
it did.
was, because the Wyoming, they jumped at them. I mean, they like the Wyoming officers really, and that's Montana, Wyoming. You get the elk guys, man. There's a lot of elk people.
Yeah, and this 2014, I'm thinking like that's pre on X app days.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And even if OnX doesn't work though, and
like,
there's no cell service down there in the Bighorns. I've been there.
but that's also a classic like hunting case of like you're chasing animals and then you might not know where a border is.
Right. And that's the other thing too. I want to say that might have been part of it, but I'm really
Yeah,
interested in how it doesn't say, because that was one thing I still haven't learned about this one, is
yeah.
how the people from Wyoming,
How
uh,
did they know?
yeah, how'd they know? So where did that come from? I'm just
I,
curious, is all.
now
But
that I think
I'm
about it,
glad, I'm glad that this happened though, because it did help affirm stuff. Because in 2019, like you said,
well, I think actually thinking back to this case, I think how they found out was it was a Facebook post. Like one of the guys did the
oh
elk and like brought these home today. They were, had the elk at their house and like skinned or whatever. And it's like, the time of year, people start asking questions and
yeah, no,
stuff
maybe
like
I don't. That's one part of this case I don't know, and I would like to know. But yeah,
that's what I think happened if I remember correctly. But yeah.
right. So, despite a 1868 treaty providing a Crow tribe retained the right of hunt to hunt off reservation on certain lands ceded by the Crow tribe pursuant to the treaty, the state of Wyoming cited Crow tribal citizen Clavin Herrera for hunting elk in the Bighorn National Forest. The Wyoming court sided with the state and convicted Herrera of violating state games laws in 2015. But a 5-4 decision issued in the U.S. Supreme Court remanded that the case be sent back back to the state court and affirmed that the tribe's treaty-based hunting rights remain in effect. Narf represented the Crow tribe as the Amos Curiae in the case before the state Supreme Court. And then in 2021, I don't need to read the quotes. In 2021, Wyoming court affirms Crow tribe hunting rights. The Crow tribe secured recognition of its hunting territory in the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 and secured the rights of its members to hunt within that territory in the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. However, for more than a century, the state of Wyoming refused to recognize the Crow tribe treaty hunting rights. The question finally reached the U.S. Supreme Court, in which held in 2019 in Herrera v. Wyoming that the Crow tribe's off-reservation treaty rights remain intact. Nevertheless, in 2.5 years since the Supreme Court's decision, the state has argued that the earlier decisions from lower courts meant that the Crow tribe members could not assert their rights. In effort, the state tried to nullify the Supreme Court's decision. On December 3rd, 2021, the Wyoming District Court and 4th Judicial District held that the Crow Treaty hunters may assert their treaty rights as a defense to their prosecution. The decision from Judge John G. Fenn rightly held that the Supreme Court's decision changed the legal landscape, that the Wyoming could no longer prevent the Crow tribe hunters from asserting their treaty rights basically solely on an lower court's decision. Judge Fenn's decision also held that an earlier court case in which Wyoming argued that it needed to enforce hunting laws against the Crow tribe treaty hunters for conservation purposes no longer applies because the passage of time and changes in those laws. If Wyoming wants to continue to prosecute the Crow tribe hunters in the Bighorn National Forest, it will need to prove that either he was hunting in a part of the forest that was occupied for purposes of relevant treaties, or that enforcement of Wyoming law is still required for conservation purposes, or both. This obviously is a big win for the Crow tribe and continued the vitality of treaty hunting, said NARF staff attorney Dan Lawrence, who represents the Crow tribe and is amicus curiae in this case. We sincerely hope that this is the end of the story and that the state of Wyoming will not appeal, but instead will give the Crow tribe its treaties and the respect they deserve. In June 2021, and sentence vacated. In June of 2023, the state of Wyoming dismissed the prosecution of Herrera with prejudice. The Wyoming Supreme Court vacated his judgment and sentences. So that kind of cleared it up. And they actually said, yep, we can't argue with Supreme Court basically. So we're gonna nullify those.
It really says a lot with this case too, how long that dragged. Wow. Like since
That's 10 years.
Wow.
And really, I like that's something I hope to never have that conversation with a game warden, because I try and do everything. Yes, if I'm going to hunt state land, I want to have my state tags, all that, right? But it's like, do you, game warden, do you understand what the next 10 years of your life is going to be? Because you want to find some native who said, I want to feed my family with this elk.
Right.
I want to feed my family with this deer.
Yep.
They ain't poaching big bucks, half the time, all that, right? Like, and then again, even the ones who are hunting the right way, like the big time, there are native trophy hunters,
Yeah.
that are doing it the right way. Let them cross the line if it is their legal right to cross that line. It's a national forest, like it makes sense. They mean occupied in the sense of living. No one's living, which is like Montana law. You can't shoot near a residence, basically 500 yards or whatever it is. And it's pretty known in a lot of hunting rule books, right? So there's
Permission.
precedence.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, ask permission if you're trying to, or if you know the landowner and you get permission, kind of thing. That's kind of a
right. So but it's a 10-year court case, and is it worth it in the sense of tribes? I think so. Yeah, I think it's worth it for tribal people to assert that native right to the land, because that's what our ancestors were fighting for when we were getting those treaties. When they were asking for that bloodshed to stop, the massacres to stop, the raping and pillaging of our peoples to stop, right? That's what some of those treaties are doing, is stopping that, is stopping the wars, stopping the violence, stopping the end, right? But also, how can we secure certain things? We need to secure land. We need to secure healthcare. We need to secure education, because those are core values of our culture that we like value. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
when you look at it, like those are things that we care about and want, living in harmony with nature, like just like I read at the very beginning of this episode. We were living in harmony with nature. We had a society, we had a governing society, a larger nation. We had different nations within this nation that was already operating before European contact, before European decided we're going to go take over the land, and then we're going to try and confuse these people in their history books about the real histories. But no, the real history is that they wanted this land, they stole this land, they thought they could take one over on us, but we were civilized societies. We were educated societies. We had calendars, we had ceremonies, we had these same beliefs. We weren't too much different.
No.
Sure, they may have had guns and mechanical things and metal, but we didn't need that. Our nations didn't need that. They were fine with the obsidian and the rock and the stone and the different things that we still use today, right? Think of the things we still use today. It's wild.
And I always like the seasonal round of tribes, they call it, is like you're gonna hunt or fish or gather, depending on the time of year, there's a different thing you're focused on we're in the middle of winter, and it's like you might not be doing too much of anything during this time.
We're storytelling in the
Or
winter. We're doing our art and crafts. We're sewing our parkas for all the Alaskan, that art. You're making your clothes, you're making your livelihood. You have all that time. It's dark out,
right.
it's cold out, you're staying warm. Exactly what you're saying, like
Picking up Matt and Zach podcast.
picking it back up. No, we're back, and that's really kind of it for today's episode on tribal hunting fishing rights. I know it was a lot. This is one of those subjects. That's why we saved it kind of towards the end of these like key topics. These first 10 so episodes are about these key topics in Indian country that we want to talk about and really focus in on, and kind of give you guys the definitions, the explanations, the legal jargon that really goes with it, and kind of give you that first step if you want to take that path and learn about, tribal treaties or housing, or take that step, because we intend to have guests on that can talk about this kind of stuff and that would love to talk about it. Definitely email us at gng@gng.net. Matt will respond and say, hey, what's up, guys? This is Matt. We'd love to have you on. We'd love to have that too. We definitely are need the reviews, need the likes, subscribe. So do that as well. Tell your friends, share it. That's really helpful. We're going to get into, I think, next episode after this one, we're going to do tribal nations. I think it's going to be the Hopi we chose. We're going to do an episode all about the Hopi, kind of learn some stuff that we don't know about them and share it with you, as well as some basic stuff that we might already know. They got some cool stories, I know that much. They got some cool beliefs, and they're a reservation within a reservation, so that's pretty neat too. So definitely stay tuned for that. And I think we'll have an interview too coming up soon. So definitely the podcast is changing. I kind of call this the beginning of season 2. Our season 1 is over. We went through our kind of educational series, and season 2 is upon us. We're going to talk about some cool stuff. Anything else, Matt, before we get going?
Yeah, I think too, we're talking about hunting fishing rights. It's if there's tribal people listening to this, there's non-tribal people, and it's just another opportunity to be in the outdoors, if anything. And if you're a tribal person, assert your hunting rights, your fishing rights, like, there's look at Billy Frank Jr. I mean, he got arrested 50 times. So sometimes things don't change until you do something about it. So
right, and it's doing the right thing. Those are peaceful protests. He wasn't getting too aggressive, like, yes, he's fighting back, but he's fighting back in his own way, right? And that's kind of the same thing. And we need to be smart in that way. We need to use tribal resources like lawyers and stuff to have, when we do protest and when we do get things started, like that's DAPL. Part of DAPL was the organization behind it, the understanding of those rights, those things. So definitely go about it in the right manner, because there is a correct manner to do that in, and to be loud and heard. And our ancestors have done it before, and they'll do it again. And the generations to come will keep fighting for our people, because we do have a strong people. You hear it. Every documentary that you talk about, that you hear it. We're strong, we're resilient, and we will be, and we forever will be. And we'll talk about it next time. So until then, bye-bye.
I know ballers, I know chiefs, I know riders from the east. I know educated natives down to picket in the streets. Middle fingers to police, fuck you, we come in peace. I know red-skinned hippies that be giving me the creeps. I know beauty, I know beach, I know savages and freaks. And I know a couple cousins even bougier than me. No, ain't elite, bougie native, yes indeed. Art exhibit to the club, and we roll it 20 deep. Copper on my neck, gold on my ring, feather on my hat, skin stitched chin, 100 warriors on my back, daily drumming when I sing, man there ain't no way around it.
A Native Podcast is produced by G&G Advertising and Quartz Lake Productions.